Okay, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. Perhaps there's some folks late at night. I don't know why you would be staying up late at night to join us today, but I appreciate it nonetheless if you've made that decision. I am Jaime Punishill. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Lionbridge, and I'm joined here by Ben Rund of Riversand. Ben, maybe you could take a few minutes to introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. I'm very pleased to be with you here today. For me, it's afternoon time. I'm calling in out of Europe. I look after the business development across entire Europe and EMEA for Riversand, a syndicate company. And but I had the pleasure actually working with global enterprises of smaller and enterprise sizes across multiple industries and helping them make value out of their data. And I've been doing that for 20 years. Some people say I look young, but I'm in that market for 20 years already, and I'm still enjoying that because it has been relevant before, and now it's taking it up to new heights, becoming data-driven. So pleased to be with you today here.
Ben, you don't look a day over 29. Whatever you're doing, I want some of your morning routine. I will gladly take it. I, of course, as I mentioned, am Jaime Punishill from Lionbridge. For those of you who don't know, Lionbridge is one of the world's oldest and leading language providers, from translation to localization, really helping firms become global ready to operate across multiple markets, multiple languages, multiple cultures. And Riversand and Lionbridge, I think, share a very similar version in helping companies operate in the new in a growing global environment. And two things that are very important to do that, obviously, are language and big data. We've got a lot of topics. Ben and I spent a fair bit of time chatting ahead of time. We only have about 30 minutes here. I thought I would just start with a couple of slides to set the stage and, as we say in America, wet the whistle. And then we can dive right in, and we look forward to any questions that you might have. I think Ben and I are pretty good at extemporaneously talking for hours at a time. So anywhere this conversation will be useful for folks, please let us know.
Sure. And maybe, Jaime, before we go into it, right, maybe 2 sentences about Riversand and Syndigo. Riversand is a Gartner leader in master data management, which means the 360 view of products, places, parties, and things, and connecting the dots in order to drive value from it. And we're now a part of Syndigo. Syndigo is the world's largest syndication network, which brings products to markets as fast as possible, connecting brands, retailers, and consumers. And in that context, I think we're a great match here for the conversation today.
Yeah, no, that is great. Because of course we know, as if we've learned anything in the last 24 months, globalization and going global and operating in that digital universe is it's very real for those who didn't necessarily believe, and it's very powerful. So let's start with just a couple of slides here. The obligatory intro slide, but let me just jump into what I think are a couple of very important trends that really have a couple of key things in common. There's probably not a person on this phone or an organization in the world who isn't very much trying to figure out how to use experience as a competitive differentiator. Of course, we've got lots, and we experienced very much in the last 24 months, more and more brands really operating at a global level. And if you examine the data, you actually see pretty consistently across countries, consumers prefer big global brands that they know to local ones that they don't. That's both a big opportunity and a big challenge for organizations as they try to expand their global presence. I probably don't have to tell anybody about digital transformation. That might be the most two overused words in the last 18 months, for sure. For folks like Ben and I, we've been leading digital transformation charges for many, many years before there were believers, and of course now everybody is scrambling. And in that digital world, we lose that dimension of physicality. We lose that dimension of locality. As I like to say, the last 24 months was the world's greatest A/B test. We took physicality out of it. We just went into the two-dimensional world of digital, and that world is borderless. Right? Anybody, anywhere, 7 billion people on the planet can access your website. And that means your entire digital transformation now becomes a globalization challenge. Lots of research and data that shows that B2B buyers are operating more like B2C buyers. That means expectations, whether you're talking about a business consumer or a small business, a small medium enterprise, or a retail consumer, really all operate against the same standards and principles of expected experience, expected personalization, expected relevance, right? We're all busy trying to lead a content strategy to live in that pre-commerce world. Stats I just read recently confirm trends that we've seen for years, but the average buyer spends about 17% actually interacting with an organization before buying. They spend some 83% of their time doing research online and other places. And so content really driving that message, again, coming back to how do I make that content relevant and discoverable in all of those markets. And then, of course, the last big trend that everybody is wrestling with is the presence of AI and automation inside of their businesses, whether that's marketing or it is customer support or what have you. What's fascinating to me about these all these trends, obviously the pandemic accelerated these trends that were already present. So there's a great quote I read recently: crises just accelerate what was already true. And if you're a science fiction fan, I'm a big fan of the William Gibson quote, the future's already here, just evenly distributed. And so all of these things were happening and some for many, many years. But they really accelerated in the last 24 months. And it really highlights either strengths or weaknesses in organizations as they were prepped for this. But what strikes me when I look underneath each of these 6 trends is they really have 2 things that are necessary but not often talked about in order to be successful. The first is language, culture, localization. Obviously, that's near and dear to the Lionbridge's heart and to our value proposition. But the second is data, and really getting a handle on your organization's data, really thinking quite differently about how data is tagged, annotated, monitored, scrubbed, prepared, and really made accessible to instrument your enterprise. Ben, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, if nothing else, to give me an oxygen break here. But I think these, many organizations are struggling with these things.
No, I think that is actually a very good summary of all the key categories which are driving it. And I think when we look back, you said we've been doing that for quite some years. There had been the time where we had been the conversations with the clients on the why. Why the heck do we need to do that? Why the heck do we need to get some structure in place to control information in order to be successful tomorrow? So your subline boxes start with the word how. And that's actually a good proof point of how, let's say, the world economy has switched from the why to now we're discussing the how. How can we make that happen for you that it's fast, but it's also scalable and sustainable for the next decade of the digital business era to come?
Ben, tell me, as you were supporting your customers and working with companies and organizations, or experiencing things as a customer in the last few years, where have you seen sort of success points and real struggles around this idea of digital transformation and really the data that supports that?
Yeah, and very good question. I think we can group that into multiple directions. One of you may say, oh, wow, this is obvious. Thanks for saying that on the webinar and saying that on the live stream here. But I think it all starts from the top, right? The backing of any transformation coming from the top, coming from the CEO, being the role model, being the owner of that and acting as a role model, that this is the importance. and then cascading down what that means for the individual levels and roles that everyone in an organization actually understands why and how I have to work now differently in order to either be the market leader of tomorrow or at least to survive in the battle of the market. That is one category of thinking. But then, of course, it is down to really, as I said, managing the change process, right? And I would say when this started, and conversations we had 10 years ago, why are we now building an online store, or 20 years ago, right? Still many don't have it yet. So a company which was used to do really traditional local business, warehouse business, maybe selling in stores and so on, compared to now we're selling online. Now we're trying to become a market leader in fashion online in my market or whatever. Requires a lot of change management. You need people who can win the heart of the organization. And not only in a top-down principle, but also in a bottom-up approach, taking care of the concerns of the individual people. Because, right, we may have so many different people with different backgrounds, different educations, different roles in the company to play, regardless of the industry. Everyone's probably afraid. Am I going to lose my job? How will my job change? And I've seen good examples or where companies have been trying that with very open roundtable discussions where employees could articulate their concerns about the transformation coming across. And the company was able to react to that and take them by the hand and accompany them with all the other things, right? Choosing platforms, implementing them, using different digital tools in order to make e-commerce and other things happen. So I think these are really the things which make the difference. Where the hammer hits the road, if people may say, well, this is success, you find the acceptance of the people in your organization that there's change. Some people will not stick to it. They will leave because they don't want to be part of that. But I think there is no other alternative. You have to be digital, believe it or not. But I guess the people who are following us online, they probably already do that. But I'm sad for the people who are not here at the moment.
I sometimes continue to be amazed. I worked on, I helped build one of the very first online brokerages in the United States in the mid 90s. So there's a piece of me that wakes up and says, how is it that it's 2020 and suddenly people said, oh, the internet matters, because I'd been doing it for so long. And on the other hand, for whatever reason, like I said, the world's greatest A/B test, we also saw things like, QR codes, which had been around for a long time with, fairly low adoption, but now with this great impetus of don't touch things are now the greatest thing ever, right? And in fact, great article yesterday in the newspaper about how restaurants don't want to go back. They want to keep using the QR codes. And by the way, so do consumers. They're very happy to have the menu on their phone. They never thought it would be an advantage to do that. And two, the retailers, of course, now have trackable data, which was the point of the article. It was sort of a warning, much like the store rewards cards. I think it's, now that we've moved past what I call, for many organizations, the kabuki theater phase of their digital transformation. They're very practically getting into how do I retool my infrastructure to my people, my process, and my technology, because those are always the three pillars. And you did a fantastic job of talking about the people challenge there a second ago. But as we sort of think about the process and the technology, how should firms be thinking about data, their data, how they instrument their process differently? How do you flip? Because at least to me, one of the key consequences of digitization is just the unbelievable speed that we all now need to operate at. Trend happens, you need to be on it. Event happens, you need a campaign ready. You need a product solution. You need a customer support preparation. You need something. And so organizations have to move a lot faster. And of course, that's a lot harder if you don't have the insights that you need because your data is hidden, or worse, your systems can't operate properly because data isn't structured right. So I'd love your thoughts on that, and how you see some really great examples.
Yeah, very good point. Maybe before we go there, because you initially asked for pitfalls or best practices of how to make things work or not work. And I think a very important thing is, as a fundamental understanding, is tying things to quick time to value, to quick outcomes, to prove to your organization, to prove to the management that it's worthwhile to invest. So that is still a question which matters, because you have to show outcomes much faster today than ever before. And there are many areas, and actually my favorite topic is probably a topic for a separate webinar, how we can connect data actually to tangible outcomes, because that is important when you're trying to fund your digital transformation initiatives. And you make a promise to the organization, what are the goals you want to achieve, whether this is in compliance, in e-commerce growth, in customer experience improvement, supply chain efficiencies, or others. So later on, there will be somebody asking you, what did you achieve compared to that promise? And there are models which can support that. So making it measurable, making a measurable promise, I think is incremental to that people, process, technology question as well, that you connect it to outcomes.
I actually would love to dive right into that. I'm a big fan of the outcomes discussion. In fact, I'm going to advance the slide to something that I find fascinating about our industry. I'm fairly new to the language industry by language industry standards. I spent most of my career in financial services, but I've been here for 3.5 odd years. And I was struck when I got to Lionbridge how many of our customers and the industry, the way they talk, we really talk about the factory. And I think this isn't just true in language. We think a lot of companies, very internally focused, the means of production, what we've built. Hey, did we build a big data repository, et cetera? And it's focused on, the measurement, the quality, the efficacy of what was built, but not the outcome. And we see a big trend here. I'm just going to roll this all out to tee up the next discussion. From a marketer's perspective, from an organization's perspective, creating content is really fusing what was happening in parts of the organization where, especially in things like marketing, has gone highly measurable. Everything in marketing is instrumented and measured to the nth degree. Sometimes to the detriment. Sometimes you can over measure and over obsess over data and miss some of the bigger things. But that is truly a separate conversation. But in lots of the rest of the organization, content just gets created, or manuals are produced, or web pages go up, or white papers go out, or what have you. And we think there's a shift here from a shift from content quality or content, the factory and measuring speed to really about content performance. The only thing that matters is, did I put something out there? Did it have a meaningful impact? Did I see greater sales? Did I see greater adoption? Did I see lower calls in the call center? And the only way to do this, of course, is very early on the left side of this chart. We've constructed it as a wheel, but really it starts with that content planning phase. Means you're setting your strategy, also laying that measurement strategy, laying those key KPIs, figuring out how we're going to tag and measure the content as it moves through the system, so it flows into content performance and can create that flywheel of content planning. Love to hear your thoughts on this, or how this is being applied in other places for you.
Sure. No, very good point. And actually really good idea really to visualize that as a wheel. Because right in our world, the other option would be thinking from left to right, like a supply chain direction, because you bring something from left to right, from a manufacturer to a retailer to a customer or anyhow, and there's good information flow connected to it. But I think the advantage of the wheel is it is, luckily, it's a positive thing, a never-ending story, because we think about it in the same way, right? In our cases, the customers are looking to ingest and onboarding data from internal different variant systems or from external sources, then really work on the data, manage them, enrich them, make them ready, create compelling content, which is the foundation for experience if we're selling more, and then syndicating that out, bringing that to the touch points, whether it's e-com or any other touch point in an omni-channel journey. But there, the goal is then to create really engaged experiences. In a, let's say, a social media style, right, level, right? I was just reading these days a quote which was saying every company now has to be a media company. And I think you have to think about it. And if people think, oh, can I actually post a Insta style content on LinkedIn? I would say the answer is yes, because no one cares about foolish, simple, non-exciting content. Every company needs to really step up more in engaging experiences. But then coming back to the circle is when you have published things on the digital shelf, what is the reporting you're getting back? So we're doing a lot also digital shelf analytics. How is that product performing against others, against competition? And that helps you to optimize the content of your customer experience, the content of your product offerings and service offerings, and the journey starts from you. And the faster you can publish and also then analyze back, the more you're going to sell tomorrow. Because as you said, right, every person on the globe can access your webpage. So there's not only a question for seasons, an improvement can happen every day, and you can bring your e-commerce revenue or conversion rates, you can bring them up every day. You don't have to wait for the new season or the new, right, whatever, Singles Day or Prime Day or holiday season or back to school season, whatever to come. There is a season actually happening almost every day, every hour, where you can take speed of data to improve your performance in whatever scenarios.
No, and you know, I think that's the second, you know, obviously second time we've talked about speed, which, you know, to me is really one of the hallmarks of, you know, what has become more important for organizations to operate in. You know, I know for Lionbridge, you know, specifically, you know, as the pandemic began, and you know, once we knew, you know, our employees were safe, and we had pivoted to work from home. And you know, we'd gone into business continuity planning, et cetera. We immediately then said, okay, great. Now, how do we know all of our customers are going to be going through this, and they're going to need some help, and they're going to need to communicate with their customers, et cetera. And we moved into this, you know, almost daily optimization. In fact, we stand-ups with our CEO every day. You know, because it was that kind of important to have this very accelerated, responsive motion. I know for us, the only reason we were able to do that is we had spent the previous few years really rethinking the tech stack, really putting ourselves in a position to track and monitor everything, so that we had informed data coming through. You know, it was a big change for people. You know, we rewrote all of our processes. Every marketing brief was different. The way we publish web content was different. And it was all about having data to make very rapid iterations and rapid paces. What do you see, you know, on that process technology front? Because I imagine many organizations are now, you know, thinking about the last 24 months and saying, wow, we're not geared to operate in this very rapid, iterative, data-driven universe. We were geared for very long cycles, we're geared for seasons. You know, we had 4 or 5 months to plan for this, not 4 or 5 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are many angles to it. But as you said, right, the pandemic has showed us many things and taught us many things. And one issue, a typical example, is the predictability of the supply chain, for example. Is that available? Are you actually able to deliver the promise to your client? From what material, from what supplier, from what location is that even available? At what price, in what time? And that is just one of the examples where you need data to be able to predict what's happening. And I think in that moment, finally, the cloud has become key. And of course, you all would say businesses like Shopify, Netflix, Spotify, you name them, right? I'm not saying Amazon or whatever. They would not exist without the internet and the cloud. And that means now for all of your businesses, and that's really regardless, because I really hated people on webinars and public speaking, showing all these slides about what happened to Kodak. And this is Airbnb story. You can write your own story. You can be a marketplace yourself in your industry and connect the dots and bring data together, but you need to control it. And when it's about that speed, I think the speed and the data control is a foundation. And of course, still people are asking me sometimes, is there a difference? You guys say you're a native cloud platform. There are many solutions out there. They're all somehow in the cloud. Everyone says they're in the cloud. I think there is still a gap in learning. Many people have still not understood what is the difference between a cloud native solution or something which was probably developed 10 or 20 years ago on old relational databases and certain programming languages. And then people and companies decided, okay, we host that now on AWS, on Azure, Alibaba, Google, but maybe on the first two the most. So it is kind of a legacy approach. And the question is, how does that impact your business now and how? And that hits the road when it comes to volumes. The number and the volumes of data is growing. So you know that. I don't have to tell you that here. You know all the 4 V's of data and all that big data stories and so on. But you have different sources. They are increasing. The types of data, the volumes are increasing. So that means companies are re-platforming in order to maybe become a digital marketplace in their own industry for that digital business era. A real cloud SaaS solution gives you all maintenance, updates, support included, and has other technology it's built on. We don't have to go on the architecture levels, but it's just different. And you don't get a disruption when an update comes. It's like you update your iPhone. You don't even recognize it. Today's worlds are more self-service oriented. The companies we work with, they want to give a self-service approach to access the information they need to the people without training them. So that means everyone is trying to re-platform. And if you, let's say, decide for the wrong tech, that costs you money in your total cost of ownership over the next 3, 4, 5 or more years, because then you have to re-platform again when some legacy technology vendors are migrated to the new cloud offering when they're one day building it. And there is never an easy migration. That costs additional licenses. No one is telling you that. Right. That costs additional migration implementation projects. Of course, everyone promises smooth migration, but the truth is this is not existing. And a very important thing is you have to react to change fast. There is a new thing which happens tomorrow in your business. You didn't know that this is existing today. So when that change comes, you have to react to a new competition, a new channel, a new market, a new industry, whatever you're going after. But usually you depend on a software vendor. And there's a big software vendor. I don't know how many clients Lionbridge has. How many clients do you have?
Oh, 4,500.
Yeah. So, and now think about it. You're one of this, right? You're one client of this. And every client has probably hundreds of feature wishes. And you bring them to the user group, to the customer advisory boards, and you call up the CEO if you're frustrated or whatever. But it's no company on the planet in the software business can fulfill all these thousands of feature wishes of several hundred or several thousand clients. It's just not realistic. SAP can't do that. IBM can't do that. Lionbridge can't do that. We all can't do that. Riversand can't do all that on one day. And that's why I think the new concepts of platforms are operating like a platform app concept, right? Your iPhone comes with out-of-the-box capabilities. You can use them from day one. There's nothing you have to learn. But if there's something you don't have, you use one of the millions of apps which are available on the marketplace, or you by yourself, or you have maybe an advisory or implementation partner who is able to build you that small add-on, which is maybe a small widget, which is maybe a special report, which is a special e-commerce connector, whatever that could be. But this then takes, depending on the scope, a couple of days or a couple of weeks. On a legacy technology stack, you get that probably in 3 years from now. And by then you're dead. You can't react to change fast. And that's, I think, how technology has changed. And for me, the best example is if I'm running a Shopify e-commerce store myself, I can configure it without any knowledge. Right? I'm not programming and customizing anything. I'm configuring a few things. And this one simple line of code I need maybe every 2 years Even I, as a non-technician, can do that. And I think that's the best example how the world has evolved from old to new. And at the first glance, very often people don't see the difference, but it hits you in the manageability and in the costs of running it over time.
Wow, so many places to run with that little riff. So I want to start with a couple. So, the way you teed this up, and we talked a little bit about this, as we were thinking about this presentation today, sort of, real SaaS versus fake. So how would somebody in the audience, how would one of our, the folks joining us today, how can they tell? How, what should they be looking for? What questions should they be asking to try to make just to ascertain, okay, who are the right partners to consider for the future, because they've got the right, foundation and construct that if I make a bet on making them part of this suite of services I'm going to consume, that I've chosen a good partner that I don't have to swap out, so or foundationally doesn't prevent me from doing things. What should they be looking for?
Very good one. I think the people who want to save their position, they go for an analyst opinion, right? If it's, let's say, very tech oriented, they go for the view of the Gartner analysts. And I'll tell you, I've been in the analyst relations roles for more than 10 years. And there are many myths, right? Analyst is paid, pay for play, all of that. And you can just buy your Gartner leadership position. It is not true. It is a damn hard job to convince them. And if you lie to them, they will find out. I guarantee and think most of the Gartner reports you're going to read, there might be a small nuance which is a bit away from reality, but it is very, very small. So I think if you're really looking for tech third-party opinion, I think Gartner is maybe the most respected global choice. In the digital marketing segments, people really appreciate the view of Forrester, right, which is more digital marketing e-com oriented than tech and data oriented like Gartner. Or you look at both, right, because you need some tech or Mart tech, right, to support your outcomes. So maybe it's worth actually looking at both. That is the easiest way of doing it. And sometimes it's not only looking at the chart, the wave, the quadrant, where are these dots? This is where everyone is starting at. It's also worth taking the time to read the details, the strengths, the weaknesses, the cautions, or looking at the ratings, right? Gartner does peer reviews, for example, which has become a big portal in the meantime, or G2 Crowd or other peer review websites, which really, you can't really fake them, right? You don't fake it maybe like a hotel recommendation or hotel rating. It has to be a verified user customer of that company to get published there. So I can't write my own recommendations there. I think that is the best thing, right? From a customer perspective, from an analyst perspective. Or you go with an advisory company which you like, right? You work with one of the big fours, or you work maybe with a local expert, which is maybe next to your door, your country, or your language, wherever you're on the globe, who knows that subject matter, whether it's translation, or it's PIM, MDM, DAM, or whatever kind of CRM stuff. They help you to define the criteria which matter for you, because there are criteria which is functional, but every company could be different, right? And if you go for RFPs and then for comparisons, you will see many solutions in TMS or in MDM or PIM who can do a lot. And later on, everyone scores 95 out of 100, 94, 97. Oh, where is the real difference? And in that matter, of course, I have an opinion, but there could be then other criteria. And the criteria for me are really is getting clarity on the total cost of ownership, because technology is impacting that. And really look deeper, not just at the promise, what people tell you on a slide and the promise and so on. Look at how can a company really achieve the flexibility to doing add-ons, changes, configurations to your need. Yeah? Do you have to wait 2 years and maybe then it's on the roadmap, or can you solve it in a quarter? Yeah? But in order to understand that, you have to look a bit deeper. So you need either experts in your own company who can evaluate modern technology stacks. So these typical companies also do then a kind of an architecture session where really the brain peers in enterprise architecture meet, and they know immediately what is legacy databases, what is modern databases, what is legacy ways of integrating and exporting data, um, and so on and so forth. What is the technology you need to scale performance and volumes, whether it's you're a small business or you're a big scale business and so on, um, and many other things. So I think you have to define your own criteria, which matter for your business. But when it comes to the technology decision, maybe a combination of the peer reviews of customer ratings, the analysts, and maybe advisory companies help you really to understand the details. Because in a sales pitch, right, you're going to hear a lot, right, and they promise you the world.
I was waiting to see how you were going to answer that question, because you don't know that I used to be a Forrester analyst, and so I just wanted to see at which point you were going to get off the Gartner train. And I love my Gartner colleagues. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But let me. I don't know if I'm challenging something you said, or at least let's talk about it a little bit more. If I put my CMO hat on. And unless my Lionbridge hat on it, I just say, okay, as a CMO, looking at my organization, looking at the needs of the modern B2B go-to-market, sales and marketing motion. That's a big investment in technology. And we did, when I got here, we literally tore our tech stack down to its studs. We left really only our marketing automation system in place. But we actually pulled all the data out, we cleansed it, we deduped it, we enriched it, we retooled our process, and then we stuck it all back in, and then we built, on top of that. And again, I attribute that very much I didn't predict a pandemic. I'm not that good, but I did know we were headed into a more and more digital future. And I looked, particularly like a futurist at that time, because when we pivoted and we could go all digital, we were ready. We really had so I was lucky. But one of the things I say often, as I'm, talking to folks and watching, is how frustrating it is to be a CMO these days, because there are 8,000 odd MarTech providers, and in Scott Brinker's chart, and that's it was 1,000 when he started, or maybe less than 1,000 when he started, not even 10 years ago. Amazingly enough, it is maddening to be a CMO and to try to judge the efficacy of all these pieces, and more importantly, and because it's something you said that I want to hone in on, how do you stitch them all together, and or how do you lay your foundation so you can do the things that you highlighted, right? Where not every provider can be best at everything. That means I need, Shopify for this little piece, and I need a Riversand for this piece, and a Lionbridge for that piece, and Adobe for that piece, and a HubSpot for, and so on and so forth. I'm not trying to play favorites with providers here. I don't know all 8,000. But that's really hard. And I actually have almost perhaps a contrarian view. I really believe, while we're splintering right now, that the next 5 years, what we're going to see is a core satellite universe, and you're going to make a bet on basically an ecosystem, because I can't. My team, our expertise is not best of breed systems integration. The data challenge, I don't have to tell you, is monstrously difficult the more systems I've got. And I am actually leaning into fewer core platform pieces that I can then attach, some very specific things to. And I don't know how you feel about that, if that runs counter to what you said, but it's certainly in marketing. I mean, I think this is a race between Salesforce, Adobe. There's Oracle. There's a few other big players that are just scooping up the universe to try to create that platform and that ecosystem, because you have to have a common data stack. So an integration layer. Help me understand that, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, very good one. And let's see maybe what will Google do, right? We think that they're not in that place so much, but maybe they're gonna go off the market too. No, it was a good idea of you bringing up the Scott Brinker example, because I also obviously use some of that slides. With the smallest logos you can't even read, around the 8,000. Maybe in the meantime it's more, right? Since I last time used it.
Absolutely.
So of course, and what you bring it down to the question, end-to-end versus best of breed question. Yeah, of course, it will sadly continue to get more challenging because there are more solutions in whether it's a fintech or it's marketing or it's e-com stuff. There is just more apps and smaller things being created. But of course, that question will always stay, and we see it. We see it that I think vendors are going very deep on one topic, which they're experts in, because it's a decision, can we do that, right? Others go flat with the horizontal approach and try to in their segment, right? And of course, you talked about the mega players like an Adobe, for an example, and so on. They can really go maybe deep and horizontal in all of them, but they have to do multiple acquisitions to bring that together. And then it comes to the data integration question. How can you handle different data types and sources, but in what volume? So you need kind of capabilities to integrate data, whether some have to be import-based batch styles, some have to be real-time data because it's transaction-oriented, and some are okay to be near real-time. So even there, you have to have solutions which are able to connect these dots, but also being able to manage the performance, because good technologies are able to have asynchronous processes, which you as a typical business user, you don't have to know that. Because if somebody in your marketing team does this one job, they don't care if the data is somewhere coming from the caching, because it's not impacting their job, right? But you as a decision maker need to make sure you pick the right foundations in order that you can rely on that. That has to be real time, that not, because that's an updated maybe a few minutes later, but you don't recognize it because it's not relevant for your job. And the load balancing and the asynchronous communication, data in, data out, making these things together is then key. And I think there is a trend always coming up and down and coming and going regarding, there was time when people said in our market, you have to have a single source of truth of the products, customer, supplier, locations, HR, whatever data, and you have to store it there. Really you have to cut it in, right, into that tool, that platform. Then there came times where it was more important to connect the data and let them be where they are. Well, some things can remain in CRM, some can remain in the ERP, but at the end you need to know what is referenced together, because that's again the foundation then of making a good recommendation, right? What have you purchased? What are you interested in? Are you actually Ben or are you Benjamin? And then understand the 360 view of you as a customer in the project, your product history, your preferences, maybe from social browsing and so on, and then make that relevant offer. So I think the bad news is it's not getting better. It's gonna probably get more complex, but of course there will be parts of automation and machine learning which can help automate the things which can be automated. Maybe that is the thing where we can go a bit deeper.
Yeah, we sure could. Could run on that. You know, I mean, obviously, everybody's talking about CDPs. That's customer data platforms. For those who are not familiar with that particular version of alphabet soup, you know, and so on, and you know, data lakes and what have you. And what I find interesting, you know, you know, we see this again. I see this both as a marketer. And as a marketer of language services, and, you know, going back to my content wheel, as we move faster, and we adopt AI, one of the things that, and again, love your perspective on this, that I find, and I've watched this for 25 years, as people adopt technology, they don't change anything else in the organization other than the addition of the technology. And so what really happens is you're now scaling and accelerating whatever you did before. And you quickly discover that there were some things you did before that weren't very good. And you've now done them at a bigger, faster level than you've ever done them before. I call this scaling stupidity at incredible speed. If you don't go back and fix it, and I'll give you a fantastic example of this. We're really starting to apply some AI in the language process, and fascinatingly, in the language business, a lot of the qualitative assessment of the work came at the end. Hey, was this a good localization? Was this a good translation? And we have lots of ways of measuring that. Sometimes companies even hire two of us. So we will give a language quality assessment of the other firm. When you start to use things like machine translation and other linguistic AI tools, what you quickly discover is those things don't deal with nuance very well. And the quote, the human browser of the translator, the linguist, the project manager had masked the fact that there was a lot of badness in the source. And so now we're taking all those quality things and we're moving it up to source optimization. Maybe we shouldn't translate this at all. Maybe the source has to be improved. That's a radical retooling of the entire language, not only the language production process, but the entire way an organization might create a piece of content. So, as folks are thinking about AI, everybody knows that relies on a lot of data. I'm curious your perspective on this, because I think this is one of the perhaps most poorly understood dimensions of the transition to automation and the transition to AI, and the effect the speed will have. Because if there's fissures, if there's cracks, if there's breaks anywhere up front, you have exposed them at a scale and a pace that you've never done before.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, fully. And I'm actually a fan of talking about more machine learning in the context of data, because that is, I think, more trustworthy to the business users. Because you have a machine and that is being trained, and it increases the know-how, which every training, like you train for sports, you're not going to become the Olympic champion when you have not trained for it. I think that's maybe an analogy for it. So you can ask maybe some of the gold medal winners at this point in time how often they have tried this thing before it's so perfect and have done it. It's true. I was having the pleasure lately on other webinar talking about the hyper automation in e-commerce. And our concept, of course, is there are things you can automate, but there's still also a lack of trust, right? In society, in companies, right? Is that a good or is that a bad thing? We have to assimilate with it. And at the moment, we think also from the people process technology perspective, a good mix makes sense at the moment, until we reach a certain level of trust that the things really work. And of course, a typical example in e-commerce, I think what people understand is, imagine you're selling many 100,000 or even millions of products online in maybe multiple languages. Then you really have an issue, right? Because you have to automate things. It's not sustainable to have everything manually translated, right? Like in the old days, right? It's not only, then there's one factor is translation. One factor is then personalization, right? Maybe a text or a description which is personalized to Jaime versus Ben, because we have different interests in our private activities or gender specific stuff, right? I didn't want to open up this big discussion too, but let's not forget that as well. And then you also want to look in, let's say, describing nice, compelling descriptions, which are emotional and not just listing attributes, but you can take attributes and transform them actually in a compelling description using smart machine learning logics. And there is potential for automation and improving the operational efficiencies of organizations, but you have to put certain quality gates, data quality concepts and governance concepts in place in order to avoid failures which we have all seen, and they go then viral, right? All the failures are over the place over time. And I think, of course, we have to get some control and quality rules in order to avoid problems. But let's think about the potential, because we have luckily finally summer, and you spend time out and go for barbecue, maybe invites when it's allowed, right? So if you want to buy a new barbecue grill, you can buy that by the size. It's that big. But that doesn't tell you a lot, probably. You want to know how that helps you in the size of your family or the friends you're inviting. So you better want to know this grill fits 10 steaks and 20 sausages, because that is a customer value message. And you can automate that message out of the technical attributes. And that is a value oriented way of selling based on data compared to, okay, this grill is that big and that flat and so on. But without some hard work, defining the rules and quality gates, that will not work. Let's see if ever AI will save the world on data quality, and how we're progressing on that. We'll try to contribute because it's essential and it's part of our offerings too, but it's not 100%.
Well, I love this conversation, this particular thread of the conversation. And again, fascinating to me as a newer person to this industry. This is an industry that really said, quality is the most important thing. There is, we won't send out a bad translation. The result of that, of course, is it's very difficult to scale. It's very expensive to do that, and the tension. Most people don't know machine translation which is truly one of the very, very first applications of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Alan Turing, often considered the father of modern computing, was also the father of what we now know as AI, and said, my machine will help with translation. It will solve this problem predicted by the 1960s. We would have no more human translators. Alan might have been slightly off on his prediction. There's still plenty of human translators and need for translation. But where I'm going with that is we've seen this AI, such as it were, this machine learning, capability for, now going on 80 years. And it improves, but there's still a lot of skepticism. But much of the skepticism comes from the belief, it's not good enough. And you hit this, the quality gates. And so I'm curious, your thoughts here. There's one school of thought that says, if I'm going to operate in this global world, I'm going to operate in this digital world, I'm going to personalize, right? There's nothing more personal to somebody than their culture, their identity, and their language. So would it be better to automate or lower the quality bar just slightly and be able to localize everything, so that you can address all of the customers, even though it's not quite as good, because it's not possible to do everything perfect? Or do you still believe that the quality will trump the convenience or the presence of whatever the factor is? In our case, it's language or cultural adaptation or shifting of buying processes or currencies. All things that, we've got hard data on. They stop people in their cart, right? They abandon carts. They get into their carts, not in the native currency. They get into the cart and, they click on a product description in one language and then go for details and it shows up in another language. And so I'm curious your thoughts on this, because that quality versus just delivery, quality versus presence debate, it happens everywhere. It's how AT&T, by the way, concluded that nobody would ever use a cellular phone, because it would never be as good as landline quality. I think they might have gotten that one wrong. So, I'm curious your opinion on this quality issue.
Very, very, very good question. I really like that. And I like to answer it from the outcome perspective, because the best practice which I've seen, and that was actually before the hyper automation time, I would say, in e-commerce, is I worked with a company who decided that they have different quality gates or quality rules for the margin of the different product lines or categories. So that means they try to publish fast on their online stores, almost everything. And the low performing, low margin product or categories, they probably forever kept at low quality, because it was not even worth, right, investing either tools to automate or people hours to get it right. But then they come back to circles, right? It goes online fast, try to sell, but then you grow the quality every day or every minute, every hour. But while the super high performing, high price, high margin products and categories, they really did undergo more love and care for getting it right. And I think if we try that all to connect it to the outcomes and make that measurable, that helps you maybe to balance where you're putting more efforts and less. And at the end, it's money you're putting behind it. Rather, it's either manual labor work or money for automating technologies.
No, I think that's it's exactly the right perspective, and I mentioned trying to we're trying to help our customers understand this this shift. Go to content performance, right? Look at the outcome, run the test, try it with a perfectly translated product description, try it with a not so perfectly translated product description.
Mm-hmm.
See what happens. Is it a 5% difference? Is it a 10% difference? Was it worth the cost? Was the product worth, the profitability, et cetera? And that's a very hard thing. And I use the AT&T example, very specifically because it's a great example where you define the world against an old set of metrics that said, this is the value proposition and the standard for that value proposition. Mm-hmm. But the world has changed, right? And people clearly traded the convenience of cellular technology for the quality of the call. In fact, I used to joke with the early iPhones, I don't know how Apple could call them iPhones because you couldn't make a phone call until like iPhone 4. Between the weak antenna and AT&T building up its early network in the States, but nobody cared because really what they wanted was the computer in their hand and the App Store, and the phone was almost secondary. And now those things, of course, have improved, and none of us, these things are all attached to our hands as almost a third appendage. We're coming right to the top of the hour here, Ben, and this has been fascinating. I thought I would leave the audience, just say again, if there's any questions, feel free now because the window's closing. But we talked so much about speed, and the importance of thinking about data, instrumenting yourself with a flexible, configurable system. And one of the things, the metaphors that I use for my team and I've used in other places that I find particularly useful, and hopefully the audience will too, is to kind of reorient how you think about planning and how you structure your systems and your approach in the same way that GPS changes the way we drive. And the story I tell, for the first 3 years of my Lionbridge career, I was living here in Connecticut, but driving up to Boston almost every week. The two things that were constant for every one of those trips was the point of departure and the point of arrival, which I would argue are the two things that are constant in business. You know where you are today. You have some set of objectives out there. What was never the same over 150 weeks of doing that drive, give or take, was the path. Traffic, weather, time of day I departed, car accidents, construction, and even in flight, the GPS is holding constant point of departure, point of arrival, but making little tweaks. And that's how, at least as a leader of a marketing organization, I've pivoted the way we think about marketing planning. The end objective is really quite clear. It really doesn't change. But I can't have big, long, it's not the days of, pulling out the old physical map and saying, this is how we're going to go, and this is the only way we're going to go. Because now we get real-time data. We get all kinds of information and we can pivot. And I hope that's a useful construct for folks to shift a little bit. And it is a big shift. It's a big shift in how you think about the data you need to make those kinds of real-time and near-time decisions, the number of sources of data that have to come in to give you that information, and the way your people and your process have to reoperate in order to support that kind of a journey. We're right at 10 o'clock. Ben, it was a real pleasure. I really do believe we could go all day just doing this back and forth, but I'm going to spare everybody the burden of suffering through that. Thank you, everybody who's joined us today. I hope you were able to get some value and glean some insights. Feel free to contact either Ben or myself. You can find us both on LinkedIn. I'm at Lionbridge, Ben's at Riversand, and we're glad you joined us today. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. It was a pleasure being here with you folks and with you, Jaime.
Yeah, thank you. I think with that, we're all done.